Congratulations to all the graduates of 2020, and I'll come back to that in a minute. But again, also like the Premier, I do want to share my condolences with the family who are mourning the loss of a loved one. The death that was reported yesterday involved a male in his 70s living in the Health Authority Central Zone who had underlying medical conditions that led to contributed to his death from COVID-19. That brings the total number of COVID-19 deaths in Nova Scotia to 61. Today, as we head into the weekend and a lot of businesses starting to reopen, it is very pleasing to be able to report that for the second day in a row, we have no new cases of COVID-19. So the total number of confirmed cases remains at 1,058. We have one long-term care home with active cases. That, of course, is Northwood. And it's also very encouraging to see that the number of active cases in that facility is down to one resident and one staff member. So that's very good news indeed. And I really want to commend and thank the staff at Northwood and all the staff from across the health system who came to Northwood's assistance. We still aren't able to declare that outbreak over yet, but clearly things are headed in the right direction. And I want to thank everybody who's contributed to the work, ongoing work in Northwood. The QE2 lab continues to operate around the clock, and yesterday they processed 773 tests. So again, we're testing lots of people. We're not seeing positive cases, all of which is exactly what we wanted to have, and it's very good news. So for the numbers, we currently have 3 individuals in hospital, 2 of those in the intensive care. We now have 997 Nova Scotians who can be considered recovered from COVID-19, and 44,477 people have been tested and have received a negative result. Today is a day that I know many Nova Scotians have been looking forward to. I certainly have been looking forward to this. Many businesses are starting to reopen and people are starting to access a range of services again. I know some people are excited, some are anxious, many people are feeling a bit of both. And that's natural, and having these mixed feelings is probably the best and healthiest way to approach today and the days and weeks ahead. It's really good to see that people are able to get back to work, to become more social, have a bit more normalcy back in their lives. But we also need to remain cautious. That's why we're taking this slowly, and we have active monitoring and surveillance in place to very closely track the impact of our reopening on COVID-19. Over the past few weeks, myself, my team in public health, colleagues in occupational health and safety, and Office of Strategic Management in government have all been working very closely with businesses and other sectors to make sure they have the right information to develop reopening plans that adhere to public health measures and reduce risks. All the business sectors that were ordered closed under the public health order now have approved plans and are able to open. Sector organizations are taking the lead to communicate the sector plans to their individual members, and they're posting them on their own websites. We're also linking to plans from the government website, Reopening Nova Scotia. And if you need to find that website, if you just Google Reopening Nova Scotia, it'll come right up. I just want to remind the businesses that if they're the businesses that were ordered to close, that they have to follow their sector association's plan. Whether they're a member of that association or not, it's required that they follow the plan, the association, or the sector plan that has been approved by government. In a couple of instances, there have been a newly formed industry group, so a sector or an industry that didn't previously have an association have rapidly come together, create an association, which has been very helpful in terms of our ability to work with sector by sector. The body art industry is one, the fitness industry is another who've done that, and I was able to last night review and approve a plan for that will cover gyms, yoga studios, other types of fitness businesses and facilities. So people in those industries that if they wanting to know where they might find their association's plan, if they're not clear about an association, again, they can go to the government website, Reopening Nova Scotia, and they can link to find a plan that's appropriate for them. Businesses that were not specifically ordered closed under the public health order do need to have a plan, but they do not need to submit those to government for approval. I want to emphasize this because a lot of people are sending plans or asking about where do they submit their plans, and that's good. I'm encouraged that people are actually thinking about that and thinking that they have to have a plan submitted. But again, if you weren't specifically ordered closed, we want you to have a plan, but you don't need to submit that for approval. And the number of questions around this really, to me, is a good indication of how seriously the businesses are taking this and needing to have an appropriate plan to protect both worker and public safety. I want to thank all of the sectors, all the businesses that we've been working with for the tremendous job that they have done that allows us to be in where we're at today about reopening, but a reopening in a way that respects safety. Now I want to move on to kind of Nova Scotians themselves. While we've worked really hard with businesses, we need to remind yet again that Nova Scotians ultimately have to make their own decisions about the activities that they do, the level of risk that they're comfortable with. Just because we're opening things up, individuals ultimately get to make their own choice about whether they feel comfortable and safe enough to take advantage of those opportunities. It's also important that all Nova Scotians that continue to keep up really good hand washing, cough hygiene, and especially staying home if you're feeling unwell. We need that to be part of our lives for many weeks and months ahead. We also need, as all Nova Scotians, we need to maintain physical distancing as much as we can, especially when we're out in public spaces, with the exception that if you're with your household or your family household bubble, with those individuals, you don't need to keep physical distance. I know this is going to be challenging, but to make this work, keep the reopening safe, everybody's going to need to be patient, accept the fact that there are going to be lineups, things are going to take more time, and that we're going to have to respect each other in terms of keeping physical distance. I saw another study released this week that came to the key conclusion it came to was that physical distancing was one of the key factors that minimizes the spread of COVID-19. So while we're getting out and about, back into our communities, back to work, important that we work with each other around maintaining physical distancing. I could be somewhere and doing everything I can to maintain physical distancing, but it also depends on everybody around me respecting each other's space. So it's important that we work together and follow these rules together to keep each other safe. We also need to respect that the gathering limit of 10 people is in place, except for when they're outdoor funerals and weddings that can have 15. That limit applies to social events, sporting activities, faith services, and arts and cultural events. These could be in our personal lives, or there may be events that are run by businesses. But when we have these types of activities, right now we're saying a maximum of 10 people, and they have to, if the people are outside of the household or household bubble, they have to maintain social distancing. I know that people are somewhat frustrated about this, but as I said previously, we have to open up the economy with businesses. We recognize the importance of social events. We will start to open those up, but we can't do everything all at once and introduce too much risk. So we ask for your patience, and we will look at how we slowly open up the ways that people can get together in larger numbers. It's important, again, I can't emphasize enough that we have to do this slowly and carefully. Now is not the time to have large gatherings of people. We know from all the evidence that these are the highest risk situations for creating significant transmission of COVID-19 and putting communities at risk. If we all follow the rules, use our common sense, and act with kindness towards one another, we will be in the best possible position to keep our curve flat and look as in the weeks ahead how we can further relax the public health restrictions. I was just talking about gatherings, and there are two types of specific gatherings that I want to talk in a little more detail. I know how important graduation is to students and their families. And like many other things in our lives, graduations are being disrupted this year by COVID-19. As the Premier has said, schools will recognize graduates and hand out diplomas. They have a specific protocols and processes in place for that. Separate from that, however, communities and community organizations have been asking if they can hold celebrations to recognize their local graduates. So effective today, I've made an exemption to the to the health protection order to allow these types of celebrations under strict conditions, and this will be in effect from June 8th to June 30th. I won't list all of them. They will be available on our COVID website, as well as in the news release that went out today, but there are some key items that I want to mention. First of all, that all non-school-based community celebrations of graduates must be held by a recognized business, municipality, or community organization. It's important that there is some organization that actually holds the responsibility for managing this according to the public health directive. We're also requiring that local municipality, the police and fire departments and EHS are informed about the event, and they have to be supportive of the event for it to happen as well. These are all going to be based around a drive-in concept, so attendees must arrive in a vehicle. All passengers in the vehicle must be from a single household or household bubble. Graduates can come out of their vehicle to do things like crossing a stage or taking part in a parade, as long as physical distance of 2 meters or 6 feet is maintained between all graduates while they're out of the vehicle. Where the organizers need to communicate clearly with attendees in advance of all the requirements of a specific event and ensure, like the public health protocols, they need to have a process to make sure that of monitoring to make sure the public health protocols are followed. As I said, the full list of conditions and protocols will be on our website. They're also going to be communicated out in a number of ways by government. All the usual rules and safety measures that everyone is familiar with will also apply. So we're making sure that people are aware of the importance of washing hands. So for instance, our recommendation would be if you're in one of these drive-in events that you bring hand sanitizer with you. That it's expected that anybody else, if you have to get out of the car, there will be washrooms available potentially at different events, that if you have to use the washroom, that you maintain the physical distance as required. It's important that anybody is feeling unwell on the day of these events, whether they're, unfortunately, we need to say this, whether they're a graduate or a family member, if they're unwell, they should not go to these events. And it's also people who are themselves may have a high risk for getting a severe illness from COVID-19. They want to think carefully about how much risk they put upon themselves by attending an event like this. We also are encouraging people who attend to consider wearing having a non-medical mask with them and wearing that mask if they get out of the vehicle. These events are not being organized or approved by the province. We say the criteria that I've just gone through and the one thing and more detail on the website will be provided, and local organizations, as I've outlined, can organize these events. The expectation and the requirement is that they follow the events according to the criteria that have been applied under this exemption. This has been done to allow communities to recognize graduates while at the same time maintaining health and safety. I want to be clear that these are organized events. This is not an exemption for individual grad parties. It is only for organized community-led events. Individual parties need to be held following the rules around 10 people or less, maintaining social distance. Living with COVID-19 requires a continual balance for all of us in the days and weeks and months ahead. It's unfortunate that students leaving school this year won't have a traditional grad ceremony or prom, but we do want to find a way to support communities to recognize these students, but again, doing this in a safe manner. The other gathering I want to talk about today is protests. Both the Premier and I spoke about this the other day, and I think it's important to bring this up again, as I understand there are more public demonstrations and protests planned for this weekend. We want all Nova Scotians to be safe, and that is our focus. But we also know that people have the right to organize and make their opinions known. That is also a critically important function of our democratic society. We respect the right for peaceful protest, and certainly in the message that's been delivered on the protests that have happened earlier this week and the protest plan for this weekend, the Premier and I fully support the message behind those protests. These are fundamentally, but however, it's important to recognize that the protests are fundamentally a different type of gathering than a planned social gathering or the other events that have limits on the number of people who can attend. Demonstrations and protests, people have a right to that under our Constitution, and we need to allow those to happen. But what we're asking for is that they happen in a way that respects safety. It's always been important that safety is respected in any kind of demonstration in many ways, and now we have to add on a layer of COVID safety. So it's critically important that we ask that any participants going to any of the events maintain the social distance. Anybody organizing these events should consider how they're going to facilitate the maintenance of social distance. We would highly recommend that anybody going to these events wear a non-medical mask, and that we plead that anybody who's feeling unwell do not attend any of these events. And if people are at these events and they begin to feel unwell, then they should leave, and then anybody unwell can do an 811 online assessment. But it's very important that while we allow these events to happen, at the end of the day, the Nova Scotians who want to participate need to respect that these are creating an additional risk of COVID-19, and you have to respect your fellow Nova Scotians and protest in a manner that is safe and does not create a substantive risk of a reintroduction and a spark of a COVID-19 outbreak. And I'll finish off by talking briefly about long-term care and visits by family. Many things are opening up in Nova Scotia, but we still have restrictions on visiting in long-term care. I understand the desire for people, families, to get together with their loved ones who are residents in long-term care. The last few months have been very challenging for everybody, both for the residents and for families. However, we have to also appreciate that the residents, your loved one, are at a very high risk of severe illness if they get COVID-19. And having COVID-19, as we're well aware in Nova Scotia, in a long-term care facility is a very difficult and challenging situation that puts a lot of people at risk. So we are working at ways we can start to create visits between families and residents in long-term care. And we're looking at a number of options, working through some of the feasibility and the logistics with long-term care operators. And we hope as early as next week to start to bring something forward to in a cautious way, allow that visitation to happen. In the meantime, we certainly encourage people to continue to use video chats, phone calls, and other ways to stay connected. I'll conclude by saying, as things reopen and as we start to create our new normal, I want to come back to the message that I've used from the very beginning, that ultimately we are all in this together. This is about doing things that allow each of us to respect the safety of our neighbors, the safety of our healthcare workers, the safety of those who we may not even know but are much more vulnerable in our communities. So it's not about us; it's about each other. And by acting together and caring about each other, so acts of the kindness, the patience for each other, and ultimately using the common sense. That's what will continue. I want people to ask people to continue to focus on that, and that's what will carry us forward and allow us to continue to reopen in a safe manner. So I'll end by encouraging people to get out, enjoy some of the things that are reopening, support our local businesses, local organizations as we start to recover our economy, but please do that safely.